Welcome to African American History, Lesson 17. In this lesson, we will explain how American law affected the lives and citizenship rights of enslaved and free African Americans between the 17th and 19th centuries. We will also explain how slave codes developed in response to African Americans' resistance to slavery. Articles 1 and 4 of the United States Constitution don't include the terms slave or slavery. The term slave appeared in an early draft but was removed. These terms appear for the first time in the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which abolished slavery. Slave codes defined chattel slavery as a race-based and inheritable lifelong condition and included restrictions on movement, congregation, possessing weapons, and wearing fine fabrics, among other activities. These regulations manifested in enslaving societies throughout the Americas, including the Code Noir and Código Negro in French and Spanish colonies. Slave codes and other laws hardened the color line in American society by reserving opportunities for upward mobility and protection from enslavement for white people based on their race, and by denying opportunities to black people on the same premise. So-called free states also enacted laws to deny free African Americans opportunities for advancement. Some free states barred entry of free black people into the state. Some states, such as the state of New York, enacted restrictions to keep free black men from voting. Others, such as Ohio, prevented a free black person from testifying against white people in court. Before the ratification of the 15th Amendment, which gave free black men the right to vote, only Wisconsin and Iowa allowed voting by free black men. It is also interesting to note that although the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, went into effect in 1865, it took another 5 years before the 15th Amendment was ratified by the states. Another fact that is not well known is that some enslaved people had sought freedom even before the United States declared its independence from Great Britain. In 1739, near the Stono River in South Carolina, a group of enslaved people rebelled against their enslavers by marching towards Spanish Florida in hopes of gaining their freedom. The rebellion was suppressed by the South Carolina militia. However, in 1740, the colony of South Carolina passed what is thought to be one of the earliest slave codes, which classified all black people and the indigenous communities that did not submit to the colonial government as non-subjects and presumed to be enslaved people. South Carolina's 1740 slave code was shockingly restrictive. It prohibited enslaved people from growing their own food, earning money, learning to read, or moving about without a written pass from their owners. It also allowed for the corporal punishment of slaves, which could include branding, nose slitting, or castration of males. It permitted white enslavers to whip or even kill enslaved people for being rebellious. Finally, it condemned to death any enslaved person who tried to defend themselves from attack by a white person. Some people may also not realize that the Dred Scott versus Sandford decision by the U.S. Supreme Court was a major factor in propelling the United States towards civil war. Here are the facts of the somewhat complicated case. Dred and Harriet Scott were an enslaved couple owned by a man named John Emerson, who resided in the slave state of Missouri. John Emerson moved his family, including the enslaved Scotts, first to the free state of Illinois and then to the free territory of Wisconsin. Emerson then moved his entire household back to the slave state of Missouri in 1840, where he died in 1843. After John Emerson's death, Dred Scott attempted to buy freedom for himself and his wife Harriet from John Emerson's widow. When Mrs. Emerson refused the sale, the Scotts filed a lawsuit in the Missouri State Court, arguing that once Mr. Emerson transported them into a free state, they were effectively already free. The Missouri State Court initially rules in the Scotts' favor. Following the Missouri State Court decision, Mrs. Emerson transferred ownership of her late husband's estate to her brother, a man named John Sanford. Sanford appealed the decision to the Missouri State Supreme Court and won. Dred and Harriet Scott then filed another lawsuit in the U.S. District Court at the federal level. After dragging on for nearly 15 years, the case finally made its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Chief Justice Roger Brooke Taney's decision in the case proved to be quite controversial. First, Taney asserted that since enslaved people were not considered citizens at the federal level, they did not have the right to file lawsuits in federal court. It was the second part of Taney's ruling, however, that greatly angered abolitionists and legislatures in the free states and territories. Taney declared that the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which gave new states and territories the right to decide for themselves whether to enter the Union as slave or free, was unconstitutional. Taney was effectively saying that slavery was the law of the land in all of the states and territories. Many free states and territories rebelled, passing laws declaring that any enslaved person crossing the border into their state would from that point forward be considered free and could not be re-enslaved even if they returned to a slave state. The Dred Scott versus Sanford decision greatly intensified tensions between the slave and free states that eventually erupted into civil war. In a strange twist, Dred and Harriet Scott were later sold to another owner, who then granted them their freedom. Although Dred Scott died in 1858, about a year after being freed, Harriet lived until 1876, long enough to see slavery abolished in the U.S. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, leave a comment, and share it on social media. You can also subscribe to the channel at Quietly Radical on YouTube to be notified whenever new videos are released. Please join us next time when we'll discuss the social construction of race and the reproduction of status.